We begin with the obvious.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, let's get right to it. It is the Monday after the attempted assassination of former President Donald John Trump by Thomas Michael Crooks, a 20-year-old Pennsylvania man. Yeah, no, we'll call him a man. Who purchased an assault rifle. Actually, his dad did for him, and then somehow wound up atop a roof about 148 yards from the stage where Donald Trump was to be giving a speech in Butler, Pennsylvania. Secret Service, working in coordination with local law enforcement, had already done a sweep of the facility, the entire grounds, rooftops, had everything cleared, and yet somehow this 20-year-old man, we'll call him, skinny little, often bullied fella, according to high school classmates, who walked around with a pro-Second Amendment t-shirt and camouflage pants, oh yeah, and an assault rifle, managed to shimmy up atop the roof and take a shot, several actually, towards the former president of the United States. I talked with a friend of mine who works in law enforcement in South Carolina. He has worked in conjunction with the Secret Service on a number of occasions for the former president, for the current vice president, and I quizzed him just haphazardly a little bit about how that works. And suffice to say, the Secret Service has to rely on local law enforcement to assist them, particularly with large events with a big footprint like this, because it's impossible for the Secret Service in its size and shape to know everything about everywhere within these United States. There will be very little scrutiny for local law enforcement, and I'm not saying that there should be. There will be, however, a lot of hand-wringing before the House of Representatives. Representative James Comer, you know him, he of the House Oversight Committee, loves to have a good theatrical performance in his chamber, has already called on an investigation into the Secret Service, and Homeland Security. There will be, I'm sure, fresh impeachment charges for Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, head of Homeland Security, because that's what they do. We'll have a healthy discussion about inflamed rhetoric, because that seems to be the new bargaining chip. And I'm telling you, liberals, progressives, don't take the bait. I'll get into that in just a little bit. I'll have a guest in the second half of today's show. He is author, former sociology professor and teacher, current congressional candidate, Mal Hyman. He authored a book a few years ago called Burying the Lead, the Media in the JFK Assassination. We will talk a little bit about the media's reaction to assassinations in general, since we have that one, the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981, and now another attempted assassination, this one for Donald John Trump in 2024. I had people, by the way, reaching out to me instantaneously. What do you really think? What are your thoughts? Tell me what you're really thinking right now, Ron. I think people wanted to get something sinister out of me, maybe to, I don't know, maybe to catch me. No, I don't. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody that reached out to me, good friends of mine, were reaching out to me to maybe scratch an itch that they didn't feel comfortable scratching themselves. Does that make sense? Like they wanted to say something nefarious and nasty, something along the lines of, I wish he'd got, You ain't getting that from me. That's not how I roll. And I'm not going to give you the standard violence has no place in politics because everybody's been saying that. And I'm not saying I disagree with that. I very much disagree with that. But we have to stop pretending that violence doesn't have a place in politics when the person targeted this past weekend very much brings violence, giving it a place in politics. He insists on it at his rallies. He speaks often about it at his rallies and in his rhetoric. We'll get to the whole who's at fault, the rhetoric game in just a little bit, but suffice to say, I've never really been shy about my thoughts. Hello, I do a podcast 5 days a week that airs on an internationally heard radio station, America One Radio, on demand of Progressive Voices, and of course available via podcast for anyone who wants to hear it wherever they want to hear it. I'm not shy with my thoughts. I mean, maybe folks want me to say something unseemly, but I'm usually pretty consistent and unfiltered. So I've nothing to say off the record that I wouldn't say on it regarding this incident. So here's what I really think. And by the way, I shared much of this on my socials at Ron Show ATL on Facebook. I don't think I shared it on Twitter or Threads. Sorry, X or Threads or Instagram, but I definitely posted this to the show's Facebook page at Ron Show ATL. I obviously don't want anyone assassinated. I would never want spouses and loved ones. Where is Melania? I would never want spouses and loved ones to have to endure such horror and sudden and senseless loss. I do, however, want a crooked, dishonest, fraudulent felon brought to justice, and I certainly don't want a fraudulent felon to occupy the nation's highest office another day, let alone 4 additional years. Sure to be, as if not more devastating than the first 4. Someone assassinating him isn't how I want him denied his aspiration, however. That's the job of the American people, through nonviolent means. That's what our forefathers envisioned by granting we the people the ability to use our voting power to avoid bloody clashes. As much as I can understand the palpable frustration that we the people have had our voting rights denied, threatened, curtailed, obstructed, and or diluted through the Electoral College, being such a dilution by a capped house set at 435 for nearly a century. We needn't resort to bloodshed and violent ends to address those frustrations. We have to register and vote. Every chance we get, we have to vote. Period. That's how we win. I'm saddened we've let the tone and tenor of our political discourse get so heightened. Do I think Donald Trump and the current makeup of the GOP are a threat to democracy? Oh, absolutely. And don't stop saying it. They're going to try and convince you that that is the sort of tone and rhetoric that caused this. Do not blink. Irrefutable, given his refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election to this day, and his inciting an insurrection, his many and varied attempts to subvert the will of the people in Georgia and in Arizona and throughout these United States. What occurred Saturday night is perhaps more a result of watching our system of justice get bogged down with complicity from elected officials and unelected judges, frankly, and the persistent stonewalling of justice by a deeply sick and unjust system infiltrated by flawed people running cover for a deeply more flawed man for partisan rationale. This, too, can be addressed best, however, by we, the people, putting our shoes on and participating in our role as activists and voters. I'm also saddened that I see so much of my country ensconced in this fanaticism with such an obvious fraud and deeply immoral and self-serving narcissist that people insist it was the hand of God or Jesus that spared him. Please. As people today mourn the death of an innocent attendee, no God or Jesus I ever grew up learning about would associate with someone of that man's ilk. And I have serious questions about any deity that did so while letting some innocent life be lost to protect such a flawed person. Make that make sense. You can't. Again, that's where the nation's majority comes in. with its role in showing up at the polls to do what's right and just, and with a might that needn't result in bloodshed or loss of life. If anyone's asking, that's what I really think. Now, we're told a lot, by the way, over the weekend on the left. I found myself doing a lot of driving because I had an open house to attend to in Gwinnett yesterday. So I found myself listening to the wall-to-wall coverage. WSB Radio decided, let's bring in Eric Erickson for 5 freaking hours. And they did. And Eric spent much of the show blaming the left. Because all of the bullets are coming from the left, he says. So, okay, the J6ers didn't bring guns and bullets, but they brought everything else. Zip ties and knives and assorted paraphernalia. And actually, I think, wasn't there a gun apprehended? Anyway, because they failed to shoot anyone or shoot at anyone. Apparently that doesn't count. And I don't know, his line of demarcation apparently begins in 2012 because he doesn't want to cite the attempted shooting of Gabby Giffords. But we have to dial down the rhetoric, we're told, because saying that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, which he is what caused this. Well, we don't know that. We have no idea. We know that the 20-year-old would-be assassin, who is dead now, is a registered Republican, to which, by the way, Eric Erickson opines, has more to do with the fact that he must have registered to cast a vote against Donald Trump. He has no idea. Eric has no idea. In the presidential primary. Again, having no idea. There's this surmising that, well, somebody made a $15 donation from that household. Well, his parents are both educated. The $15 donation going to an Act Blue account, a progressive account of some sort. So he must really be a liberal. Oh, no, not an undercover 20-year-old liberal who wore a Second Amendment T-shirt and whose dad bought a semi-automatic rifle for him. Does that all add up to you? And again, I don't care what side of the aisle this kid was going to be on. Kid. There I go, calling him a kid. He's 20 years old. He's a man. Was a man. But they're going to try and disarm the argument that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. Take that out of the mouths of Democrats. And I say, abso-fucking-lutely not. Because he is. They know it. We know it. And we're not going to stop saying it. Or at least I'm not. You might. Do not. I'm telling you, don't. It's a principled argument against letting that man anywhere near elected office again. If someone wants to surmise, well, saying that is inflamed rhetoric and it might get him shot. Well, maybe the actions that cause one to surmise he is an existential threat to democracy is what put him in the crosshairs of a deranged 20-year-old. And not calling a spade a spade. Do we need to dial down the rhetoric? Oh, absolutely. I mean, we could have started with Sharon Angle in Nevada. She of the Second Amendment remedies. Remember her? We could go back to Sarah Palin with the crosshairs on congressional districts, one of them being Gabby Giffords, by the way. But the right didn't want to dial down that rhetoric. The right didn't want to dial down the rhetoric when Paul Pelosi was attacked. Reminds me of this opportunity Donald Trump had to crack a joke about Paul Pelosi. Listen to this.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know?
That's hilarious, right? I mean, just hilarious. The man nearly died. Nancy Pelosi, by the way, sent her well wishes all class. Well, we have to stop branding him as a fascist, as the next Hitler. Huh. Anyone who was alive between 2009 and 2017 knows that the evocation of Hitler in Obama form was rampant and often. Columnist Thomas Sowell in National Review comparing Obama's crowds to Hitler's crowds. Sarah Palin praising a column linking Obama to Hitler. I'll have citations for both of those in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com. Yeah, sure, we need to dial down the rhetoric, but on the left, I'm telling you, don't blink when you say existential threat to democracy, because that ain't inflamed rhetoric. It's a rock-ribbed fact, borne out in courtroom after courtroom after courtroom. Now, here's the thing. The Republican National Convention begins this week in earnest. They're up first. And we're going to see how pious the right wants to be about dialing down the rhetoric. Violence has no place in politics, we're told. So let's see what the gun-loving, rifle to the stage. They've done that. They've literally bought rifles to the stage and waved them in the air in their sanctimonious affection for ammunition and guns. They're up first. Will they dial down the rhetoric? Well, they've got the first opportunity. I don't think they will. In fact, I'd bet my life on it. Actually, I say the rhetoric about inflamed rhetoric. Let's talk about bullying. No, hear me out. I have a theory as to why Donald Trump was the target. Stand by for that. As I mentioned, I always provide show notes at ronshowatl.com for every episode. Everything you hear me cite, I share. I am a J school dropout, but I was a high school journalist, air quotes. So, and I actually did write for a couple of daily newspapers, the Athens Banner Herald, the Augusta Chronicle, sports, but still, for a couple of years, and I know to cite my sources. Like I will when I mention that this story came from NBC News.
As we've been here, there's a large media presence here. You've had members of the community come and approach us, including one person who said he actually went to high school with this suspected shooter. I want you to listen to a little bit of our conversation there.
He was bullied almost every day.
In what way? Can you explain?
I mean, he would sit alone at lunch. I mean, he was just an outcast, and you know how kids are nowadays, so they're going to see someone like that and they're going to target him because they think it's funny or whatever. So it's the best way I can describe it. And it's honestly kind of sad. Like, I don't want to say this is what provoked it, but you never know.
He was bullied, often mercilessly. In American politics, in the last 20 years, if you had to come up with a top 5 list of bullies, tell me 4 of the 5, or all 5, wouldn't begin with Donald John Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Let's come back to Georgia. Congressman Mike Collins, who said Joe Biden gave the orders on social media. Yeah, the f*** your feelings crowd have been bullying politically since Donald Trump started talking about birtherism, wanting a birth certificate to be somehow regenerated, I guess, because the one that had been given as proof wasn't proof enough that Barack Obama was an American citizen. Donald Trump is this inflamed rhetoric? Am I allowed to say this? Donald Trump is a bully. And a bullied 20-year-old young man who spent all of high school, and I'm sure middle school too, because middle school is rough, being bullied. That bullied 20-year-old man tried to shoot America's biggest, loudest, most powerful bully. Politicians rush to their social media profiles, talk radio, Sunday talk TV shows to tell us that violence has no place in politics. They're wrong. And they're late to try and condemn that because violence has been introduced into American politics as normal. Violent rhetoric. And instead, maybe we should discuss if bullying has any place in politics. Should someone who aspires to serve in the halls of Congress, for example, bully a mass shooting victim on the streets of Washington as that young man is in town to speak to elected representatives on behalf of an organization of students and young people who want action on mass shootings? Author, sociology professor, and teacher, congressional candidate Mal Hyman joins me next when The Ron Show returns on America One Radio.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
It's my honor to have my good friend, current congressional candidate in South Carolina, by the way, and author, sociology professor, and teacher Mal Hyman. He wrote the book Burying the Lead, the Media, and the JFK Assassination. Mal, good morning. Thanks for joining me today.
Good morning. Great to join you.
So you obviously have written a book about the JFK assassination. It's been something you've been fascinated with for much of your life, having been a young person who lived through it and saw it all play out. The JFK assassination, the King assassination, the RFK assassination, the attempt on Ronald Reagan's life, and now the attempt on Donald Trump's life. What sort of insights do you have when comparing all of these events with what transpired Saturday?
Whoa, that's a tough question. It's much easier as a professor or teacher to give a 50-minute answer than a short answer. Mm-hmm. But America has a very violent history. There's more political assassinations and attempts than folks would think. And it gets into the study of history, but isn't afforded the importance that it deserves. And we can turn the clock back to McKinley or Garfield or Lincoln, and it's had a significant impact on American history. The military talks about it in terms of decapitation. In Europe, Operation Gladio was assassinations of leaders and false flag bombings that was part of the anti-communist crusade where Nazis were supported, former Nazis. So it has it has been part of American history. In this case, we're looking at a Secret Service that broke down, whether it was a faction that took over, Cheadle, who was appointed in 2022, might not have the loyalty of a number of factions within the Secret Service. Folks may remember that the Secret Service deleted their files on the January 6th insurrection.
Right.
And leading up to it, what many of your listeners may not be aware of is that the Secret Service did not cooperate with the Assassination Record and Review Board to declassify the documents on the Kennedy assassination, and were asked to turn over their documents in 1995, and they shredded them. And it made a news cycle for about a day, and that was it.
Yeah, a blip on the radar.
So we've had non-cooperation before, and factions doing different things. That's one of the observations that was a bit counterintuitive, that elements of the CIA might have been involved in the assassination of John Kennedy, but not the head of the agency. So with this case, where the information's closely guarded by the FBI, we don't know who's been meeting with the alleged assassin or the attempted assassin. So we're a long ways from knowing what really has transpired. Meanwhile, people are justifiably suspicious with this. The media does seem to be interviewing witnesses. This did happen in '63 with the assassination of John Kennedy, what I think is notable is a lot of those interviews slowed up about 4 days after the assassination. So some of these people being interviewed may not be interviewed again, may not be highlighted in narratives, may not be interviewed the way we would like as part of the House or Justice Department investigations.
I have to think that if we had mobile devices in 1963, we'd see a lot more footage, obviously. But I also can't help but wonder why we don't see more footage from Saturday night, because folks are always on their mobile devices at rallies and speeches and concerts. My God, people watch things through their phones instead of watching what they're at. I'm stunned we haven't seen more footage that shows us anything more than the angles that we've gotten from cable TV coverage. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah. We're in a new era, as you mentioned, with cell phones. And I think some of that will be coming forward probably on smaller news sites, and then may work its way into popular coverage and larger news sites, very fractured media landscape. So we may end up seeing some of those. There's still an analysis of some of the footage of Dealey Plaza during the Kennedy assassination that a lot of people haven't seen. So, yeah, I think some of that's going to come forward, and we really have no idea who the assassin who was meeting with. The FBI is supposedly working over the cell phone. You then move into would it benefit Democrats who have to answer for all these questions, controlling the government, to try to assassinate the opposition, or is that risking civil war? So there's kind of the case of logic on it. And then how might the right wing have an attempt or an assassination? How would it help them? So you get into those motive questions. I think we're justifiably suspicious and trying to be critical about it, and we don't have much to work with yet.
We're with author and sociology professor, teacher, and current congressional candidate Mal Hyman. He wrote the book Burying the Lead, The Media in the JFK Assassination. I never really thought about it from a deep state going after Trump strain, but you brought that up. There's a lot of distrust for the federal government and even, I guess, federal law enforcement now. I mean, the FBI taking the lead on this investigation, and yet MAGA Nation doesn't trust the FBI. And while you don't hear distrust for the Secret Service, there are now questions about the Secret Service and DHS. Secretary Mayorkas will probably get dragged into a House Oversight Committee meeting again, and there could be articles of impeachment for him. But I wanted to ask you, because you're a congressional candidate as well, the delicate nature of the back and forth now that's going on for like a day and a half about violent rhetoric. I hear a lot of voices on the right saying, well, it's because pundits and politicians have been calling Donald Trump an existential threat to democracy that this happened. Well, we don't know that that's why this 20-year-old man who was often bullied in high school went after America's biggest bully. But what I said in the first half of my show today, I implore liberals, progressives, do not stop saying that. He is a threat to democracy. A fact is a fact. A spade is a spade. A turd is a turd. You call it what it is. That's what he is. History shows that. Facts, data, court cases show that. So not calling him what he is, to me, is to try and disarm the left. But you followed politics and you followed political rhetoric for a long time. It seems as if, to me, we're not having a frank enough discussion about the violent rhetoric and the long history of it from conservatives in this country. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right. And a lot of the rhetoric coming out of whether it's Fox or One America network or Newsmax or talk radio has been violent for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene's tweet from just 18 hours ago. We're in a battle between good and evil. The Democrats are the party of pedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. Mal, they've called us communist and socialist and destroying the country. How does that not incite violence as well? Or how can it not possibly be any more dangerous than calling Donald Trump an existential threat to democracy?
Well, you're right. It's ominous. And the rhetoric coming from the right would make Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister for Hitler, envious. This is right out of that playbook, and then they've amplified it. You're not against an adversary politically, they're the enemy of the people. And Trump's used that language for years, and it goes much further than that. One of the other strategies is the big lie. We've seen that not just on the election, but on literally hundreds of issues, because the right and Trump have learned that they can lie much faster than the media can fact check him. And we saw that on display even in the debate. So we've seen years of Trump, and lying fast means that you can get away with much of it. There's also a notion right out of Germany in the 1930s to constantly attack your adversary so that they never do anything right, so that you build a sense of anger with your followers, but also that the other side's not legitimate, that they don't pass any legislation. You probably talk to some MAGA people, they don't even realize that there was an infrastructure bill passed. They literally don't know anything that's gone on that would be creditworthy with the Democrats.
And yet their politicians will take credit for it at the state and local level and try and show up for the photo op. Yeah.
Well, you're right about that.
And then, I mean, you mentioned the Infrastructure Act, but how about the Inflation Reduction Act and the green energy jobs that are going to red counties and red states?
Sure. The messaging coming from the far right is much more effective than the messaging coming from the Democratic Party. And it's painful to watch it because, as we've talked before, it's a good economic record. It's not where we need to go. We've got a lot of work to do. But if you have the lowest inflation rate in the Western world, and you've got the lowest unemployment rate in about 40 years, and you've got about 15 million new jobs created during the Biden administration, almost 1 million of those jobs are factory jobs, unprecedented investments in manufacturing, that's a solid record. And then they were blocked by Republicans from going further on raising the minimum wage and changing health care and child care and the like. And we also know that about half the publics live in paycheck to paycheck, and they're not seeing the progress the way they'd like to. But they've been blocking the legislation just as they blocked it on the border so they could whip up the public on the scares of violence and drugs from immigrants coming in. This couldn't be more cynical. And in gatherings of Democrats have said, Trump seems to be the poster boy for the 7 deadly sins. And people are laughing, but no one's pushed back and said, you've gone too far with this. And now with this assassination attempt, I fear we've made a martyr of a guy who's the poster boy for the 7 deadly sins. I mean, when reality surpasses satire, we need a term for it. And that's where we're at. And it's I've been telling folks everything sacred is on the ballot this time. Democracy is on the ballot. Dignity, diversity, women's rights, the environment, all of it. This is the most consequential election in our lifetime. And I fear that we're amusing ourselves to death. And we're not paying attention to this the way we need to.
Well, Saturday night obviously was not a funny moment, and the reaction to it obviously not funny as well. The GOP is first up when it comes to having the stage with their convention and the sort of rhetoric that they will introduce. Will it be nonviolent rhetoric? Will it be a tone of seeking to bridge a divide? Will this turn Donald Trump into George Wallace, the Alabama governor who was famously an inflamed racist who really, turned a corner after an attempted assassination on his life and returning to office? I have my doubts. I don't think Donald Trump's wired that way, and I don't think the GOP is anymore either.
Well, it's a great question, and we'll see on it. But if I was to speculate, Trump's very good at speaking out of both sides of his mouth. So I think at first he'll make statements about how we need to have a nonviolent society and a more peaceful dialogue. And then he'll whip up his crowd the best that he can, claiming that the Democrats are stealing democracy and stealing freedom and opportunity and whatever he normally is going to get into to rile up the Republican crowd. So I think he'll have a fig leaf of civility and then move into whatever rhetoric he wants to rile up his base.
I have a theory that this has the opportunity to either make him less hostile politically, less of a political bully, or actually take him to an unseen level that may actually finally awaken the American public to just how dangerous a candidate and a potential American president can be again. I want to ask you, in fact, I'm going to take a quick break and then we'll come back. I want to ask you about the effects of this on the ground. You obviously are running for a congressional seat in a leans red district in South Carolina, and the effect of the Biden or Harris question on the ticket. We'll do that in just a second. The Ron Show with Mal Hyman, author, sociology professor, teacher, and current congressional candidate. Here on The Ron Show, the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. Final few minutes of today's Ron Show, the first one after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump over the weekend. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Follow us at RonShowATL on Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram threads. Author and sociology professor, teacher, and current congressional candidate Mal Hyman joining us. He authored the book, Burying the Lead, the Media in the JFK Assassination. So you being a congressional candidate, we live in weird times. The assassination attempt, obviously this is so fresh, I can't imagine you really have much of a sense of what this will do as far as impact on your race. You live in a red-leaning district in South Carolina, but I think a winnable district. I've lived there for a while, and we've talked about this. We've worked together to help strategize on occasion. But I want to ask you a bit about the inner workings of the Democratic Party and the question who should be atop the ballot. And I know we've had conversations about this off the air and off the record, but as it stands now, what do you think the direction the party will take is?
It's tough to tell because party insiders may decide the next time that Biden has a particularly bad day that's one too many. And the polling data indicates that Harris is a stronger candidate. But a lot of that's shielded from even party regulars at the statewide meetings. And while there's a gnashing of teeth and a sense that Harris would be a better candidate, there's a political price to pay if you speak out publicly for Biden to resign. And Biden has looked better on the campaign trail than he did during the debate, which was a debacle and was very painful, because Biden's journey is heroic and all of us age and it comes in cognitively on cat's feet. So it's unclear to what extent his advisors are responsible on this. But he does not poll as well, and it's clearly going to be a close election and a contested election. And Harris does better mobilizing the base and youth and minority voters, undecided voters. She's become a better candidate. She campaigns significantly better than she did in 2020, whereas Biden was never that strong a candidate on the campaign trail.
I mean,
his communication skills have eroded some. And the irony, of course, is he he is the most experienced candidate.
Yes.
He can do a good job running the country.
Right.
He just can't communicate well in a campaign cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and we're in a campaign cycle right now.
Kamala
So
also wiped the floor with Joe Biden on the debate stage in the 2020 cycle before things got shut down. People seem to forget that, but I can't help but remembering watching the debate between Joe and Donald Trump a few weeks ago, thinking, man, Kamala would have sliced and diced this man into a million pieces.
I agree with you. She's very good at that, and she's a much better campaigner than she used to be. And people talk about, well, there's a reluctance to vote for a woman or an African-American woman. I think there's a lot less of that than we would imagine. And the polling indicates that she's about 3 percentage points stronger. And imagine the Democratic convention where she would get introduced and be able to give a speech prime time to the nation. There'd probably be, millions of people that would be looking at her a second time and recognize she's ready for prime time and vigorous and far more interest and with the youth who are pretty much turned off to Biden because of the war in Gaza and because of his age. So Biden can have a good campaign event where he goes to Raleigh or he goes to Detroit, and those were significantly better than his debate performance. But youth aren't watching it, and a lot of people don't follow it that closely. So perceptions are reality, and Democrats would do better if Harris was the nominee. I think we're in the position where only close insiders could convince him to step down. And he's in the psychological trap of the resilience that has always served him well, personally and politically, is where he's gone with this. And he's dug down deep and he's trying to do the best that he can to fight through this. And a lot of people are loyal to him as a person. It's a heroic journey. And I try to encourage them to be loyal to democracy and the earth, because if Trump prevails, I think all bets are off on democracy, and we could turn the clock back a generation or two on social policy.
The irony is it's almost a completely white portion of the Democratic base, whether it be those in Congress or in the U.S. Senate, George Clooney, who are calling for Biden to step down. And you don't it's African-American support that keeps Joe Biden, I think in office right now or atop the ticket, because you're seeing no erosion. I can't think of one credible African-American Democrat voice that stepped forward to say he should step down. It's been almost all white.
It is ironic, and you're tempted to psychologize on this, but I think you're right with your observation, and I think it's out of a sense of loyalty, and it has not been made clear what you need to be loyal to. I mean, the civil rights movement's going to be turned back, environmental rights, women's rights. When authoritarians take over, they go after the low-hanging fruit, so it's an uneven erosion of constitutional liberties until the system of checks and balances collapses. And a Trump team that appoints more judges makes the judicial remedies much more difficult. And a Biden debacle in this election means we'll lose the House and the Senate. I think all bets are off at that point. It's very tough to imagine where that could go, just as it's tough to imagine, what's happening with climate change.
Which we could have another complete topic of discussion on. Unfortunately, I'm hearing the music and we're running out of time. Mal Hyman, author Burying the Lead, the Media, and the JFK Assassination, sociology professor, teacher, and current congressional candidate as well. The website, malhyman.com, if anybody would like to drop a little nugget there.
Thanks, Ron. Great to join you.
Thanks. I appreciate the time, Mal.